Hi, welcome to Constitutional Chats, hosted by me, Janine Turner,
and Cathy Gillespie,
with students
Dakare, Chatman,
and me, Tova, Kaplan.
Join us as we discuss hot topic issues with constitutional experts. It's sponsored by Constituting America.
Give you the official welcome to Constitutional Chats with me, Janine Turner, Cathy Gillespie, Tova Kaplan, and Dakare Chatman. So welcome to Constitutional Chats. Today we are breaking down the Constitution, Article 1, and our expert guest is Dr. Colleen Sheehan. So we are very excited about today's show, and you can participate by asking questions. And Cathy has a little something she wants to say about one of our fabulous sponsors.
Yes, we want to thank this week's sponsors, Robin and Everett Helmuth of Alexandria, Virginia. They own the Passport Auto Group in Virginia and Maryland. And the Helmuths are longtime generous friends and supporters of Constituting America. And we thank them for all they do that make our Constitution education programs possible.
Hear, hear. We second that. And third, thank you very much. Okay, now I'm going to do an official opening. I am Janine Turner, so you know a little bit who everybody is. I'm an actress by trade. You can see all about that at JanineTurner.com, but I'm also the founder and co-president of Constituting America. So we're so thrilled you're with us today. We have a multi-layered, multi-tiered foundation with contests for kids, and we speak into classrooms and teach them how to write a petition, and we have a 90-day studies for our educational library. We are just multi-tiered, so please check us out at constitutingamerica.org. And the co-president of Constituting America is the extraordinary Cathy Gillespie. I like to say that it takes a left wing and a right wing to fly. And Cathy and I are really, truly a pretty amazing team. So without Cathy, I would just be flapping around with some ideas. Cathy is co-president of Constituting America and one of 16 private citizens serving on the U.S. Semi-Quincentennial Commission, helping organize the celebration of our country's 250th birthday in 2016. And she was also a chief of staff on the Hill for years and years and years. Cathy, welcome.
Hi, thank you. And welcome to everybody who's joining us today. We're excited that you're here.
All righty, and now, ladies and gentlemen, the extraordinary Tova Kaplan. And truly, she is extraordinary. Tova Kaplan is 16 years old, but you never know it, and lives in Chicago, Illinois. She currently serves as National Youth Director, a coveted spot for Constituting America, and she runs the National Youth Advisory Council. I might add, she's so brilliant. And she runs this Youth Advisory Council, as well as many other things we do. She helps us with the Constituting America, like a CEO of a top 100 company. That's what she will be someday, or whatever she wants to be. Watch out for Tova Kaplan. She is a 3-time winner of our We the Future contest. Entries are due September 17th, so please check it out. She won in the entrepreneurial category, where she created a marketing plan in middle school. She won PSA. And I think when she was a freshman in high school, and Know Your Rights, Read the Constitution, a wonderful PSA. And this past year, she won for STEM, where she created an app, which will be up shortly, because I know she's working on it. She's passionate about educating, and she truly is, and empowering young people to use their constitutional rights. And she's just a great, great ambassador for us. Tova Kaplan, say hello.
Thank you so much, Janine, and thank you everyone for joining us. People tuning in for the 100th time, or people tuning in for the first time, we're so glad to have you.
We're just so lucky to have someone like Tova on our team. And Dakare Chatman will be joining us, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dakare. Dakare is also 16. Well, no, I think he's getting ready to be 18. Currently, I believe he's 17. He is our Constituting America student ambassador. Another brilliant young man, or brilliant student. He is currently a junior full-time college student in South Carolina. And he won Constituting America's We the Future contest twice. Once for PSA, where he reminded viewers the Constitution is an American thing, so know it. By the way, you can see all of these at constitutingamerica.org, as well as testimonials from all winners who teach you how to join the contest and what their genesis was and how they pulled it all together. We're very excited about having that. So he also won for his short film, Man on the Street. He's actively involved in our National Youth Advisory Board, a great asset and wonderful young man. He is a working actor, also seen in HBO's The Righteous Gemstones and in Netflix The Outer Banks, and he is just, wow, you're going to see him accepting an Academy Award someday. Dakare wishes to be an actor, but also a politician, that says, what does I need to be an actor to be a politician? Dakare, say hello.
Hello, folks. I'm sorry for my lateness. I'm still in the office waiting to get a shot, but I didn't want to miss this, so I'm here.
Modern technology, look at that. You're doing it from the doctor's office. Okay. All right, now to our special guest. We're going to start breaking down Constitution Article 1. Dr. Colleen Sheehan. Let me tell you about how special she is. Dr. Colleen Sheehan is a real friend of Constituting America. She has been our essayist for several of our 90-day studies, and we are grateful for her friendship. We have known her we were talking earlier, for over 10 years. Colleen Sheehan is a professor of political science and director of graduate studies in the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. She has served in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and on the Pennsylvania State Board of Education. Aha, that's very impressive. Dr. Sheehan is author of The Mind of James Madison, The Legacy of Classical Republicanism. Fascinating. She's also the author of James Madison and the Spirit of Republican Self-Government, Friends of the Constitution, Writings of the Other Federalist, and she is author of the Cambridge Companion to the Federalist. Fantastic. Dr. Sheehan is published in journals such as the American Political Science Review, William and Mary Quarterly, Review of Politics and Persuasions, the Jane Austen Journal. Her current projects include The World of Emma Woodhouse, an interpretation of Jane Austen's Emma. Oh my gosh, isn't that cool? And Madison's America. Wow. So she goes from the Constitution to Jane Austen. How lucky are we today? Welcome, Dr. Colleen Sheehan.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you, Cathy. I was telling Cathy earlier that I am so impressed with the work that you are doing at Constituting America. This is what they would have called yeoman's work. It's public service writ large. If we're really truly a government of the people, then there's no way that this government can work if the people don't understand the government that is their own. And so what you are doing is an incredible public service across the United States, and I want to thank you very much for this. And in fact, some of my students have written for you, as I was mentioning earlier, and it was for a couple of them their first publication, and because of it, they went on and they are publishing widely on things like the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and current issues in America. Well, Article 1 of the Constitution, why? It's about the legislative branch, which we generally refer to as, of course, the Congress. Here's one of my questions. Why is it the first article? Why is the first article about Congress? Why isn't it about the president? Isn't it today we tend to think of the president as the #1 position in America? Or I think there are some members of the Supreme Court who think that they're the first branch of government in America. But the founders put Congress in Article 1. It's the longest article. Congress is given the most powers of any of the other branches of government. Of course, you know there are 3 branches of government, which leads to the whole idea, though it's never said in the Constitution, the words are never there, but it's written between the lines, the whole idea of separation of powers and checks and balances. And so even though the powers of government are balanced and checked, they're not all equal. Congress was given the most power. In fact, it was given so much power compared to the other branches that they had to divide it in 2. And that's why we have two branches of the Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. It's a sort of idea of, well, we want them to be the leaders in making the laws, the most important function, but we don't want them to be a runaway government. We want to keep them in control. And that's why probably the most important section of Article 1 is Section 8 that lists the powers of Congress. And you can look at that. Tova might talk about that later, but it includes things like taxation, coining money, because before this Constitution, each state coined their own money. So there was a lot of rivalry and competition, and it really hurt the economy of America badly. New York and New Jersey just didn't get along, for example. They were almost like the British and the French going at it with each other, competing. So we had to we made the coinage uniform, and that helped our economic situation, as Alexander Hamilton was one of the people leading that. Now, it also is the power to declare war, the power to punish pirates, to establish post offices, roads, and of course there's a clause that ends the Article 1, Section 8 that says that Congress will have the power to do what is necessary and proper to carry into execution these powers it's been granted. Now this sounds like a lot. So here are a couple questions I have. It sounds like a lot of powers, but they're enumerated, they're listed. Why are they listed? What, if anything, does this have to do with the idea of limiting government? By listing powers, aren't you saying that all those powers not listed, they don't have? And it would be wrong and unconstitutional for them to usurp those powers. They have the powers at the, now remember, who gives them these powers in the Constitution? Well, where does the power of the Constitution come from? It comes from those who ratified it. It comes from we the people. So Congress has those powers and only those powers that the people have granted them. That's one question. There are lots of other questions about, for example, why do we have representatives in the first place? Why do we, if the people are in charge, we the people, then why not let the people rule themselves directly? We didn't do that. We set up a whole system of government in which we choose representatives to make the laws. And remember, the president is a kind of representative who executes the laws. The court is a different story because they are not our representative. They're supposed to be scholarly legal minds who interpret the Constitution. They have a specific job. So I'm going to stop there and just ask if the students out there who are listening might kind of take on the role of Sherlock Holmes for a minute. Let's think about why the founders did it this way. You know, some of this seems like a mystery when you look at this document, but I think there's a logic to it. There's reasons for every single part of it, why it's in the order it's in, why it's done the way it's done. I'll just end the introduction with this because some of you have probably seen the play, or at least the film that's just out now on Disney, Hamilton. And I'm sitting here in upstate New York looking out on Lake Champlain at an island called Schuyler Island, named after the Schuyler family, of which Hamilton married into, of course. They were a prominent 18th century New York family. And so Hamilton in Federalist 1 said this: "It seems to have been reserved to the people of this country to decide the important question, whether or not societies of men are really capable of establishing good government on the basis of reflection and choice, or whether they're forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force." The Federalist Papers, the founding, the Constitution, was the attempt of a people to establish a government on the basis of reflection and choice. It has a purpose. It has a meaning. It's not just a group of laws. And if I had one large question, really important question to ask you all to think about today, it would be this: what is the purpose of your Constitution?
Okay, that's a fascinating open. Thank you so much, Dr. Sheehan. You know, as we move on here, it's interesting to me here, you know, what's the purpose of the Constitution? What we teach when we give our lessons to the schools and whatnot is, you know, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, among these. And then it goes on to say that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, the governments derive their powers from the consent of the governed. So we create these governments, which is what you were saying, Dr. Sheehan, we create these governments to represent us, but on the consent that we give them. We give them the consent to do this. And that's why the Constitution was written, because Abraham Lincoln talks about the golden apple is the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution is the frame that upholds it. So the Constitution is really to, in a limited manner, protect what the Declaration of Independence says, which we are created with these rights. We have life, liberty, and government is supposed to sustain that for us, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so that is certainly one of the purposes of the United States Constitution. And we talk about that, we can go into great depth. And I also liked what you had to say, because we concur, that the reason the legislative branch is first is because everyone thinks the president's the most important person now. I mean, many more show up to vote for the president when he's on the ballot or she's on the ballot than they do for their midterm elections with their senators in the House of Representatives. But the reason that's so important is because we can't get to the president. We can't walk in and just talk to the president and have a chat with him, but we can chat and talk with our representatives. And I think it was very important to our founders that we have actual people in our neighborhoods with whom we can go to with our petitions, with the things we want to change, because we're hiring them to take care of us in Washington, D.C. So, you know, I'm going to toss it to Tova to start the first round of questioning. Tova, go ahead and ask a few questions.
Sure. So thank you so much. This has been really interesting already. So when the Constitution, I feel like a lot of people nowadays take the Constitution for granted. We just assume it's always been there. And, you know, since we started our Constitution, a lot of other governments have borrowed from it, you know, worldwide. So we kind of assume that these principles laid out are just unanimous to the world and are just have always been there. And I think we take them for granted. So could you talk about or explain to us, was when the Constitution came out, was it very unique for the time? Had there ever been anything like it before? We fought a Revolutionary War, and how revolutionary was the document that came out of it? So if you could just talk about that.
Tova, what a great question. Well, of course, there'd been constitutions before in the history of the world, but not written constitutions. Generally, it was done differently. For example, what's called the British Constitution they didn't have a convention and sit down and write up a constitution the way we did in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 and then ratify it. Theirs is a series of precedents that developed over, many, many years, particularly, thinking back to Magna Carta and then going to the Glorious Revolution and so on. And the British system does it differently. What happened over the history of England is the people, remember, the monarch was considered sovereign. Sovereignty means ultimate political authority. Who has the final say? Who gets the final word? And in Britain, technically, it's a monarchy, and the monarch is sovereign. Now, obviously, things have changed, and it's a constitutional monarchy, or as Montesquieu said, even back in the 18th century, he said, it's not really a monarchy. He said, it's a republic hidden under the form of a monarchy, because England was the most liberal regime of its time before the United States. And so the idea in England is that government, the monarch is sovereign, and the monarch grants rights to the people. That's up to the monarch. And so it was a history of the people demanding or asking, requesting, sometimes it's requesting, sometimes it's demanding that the monarch allow them certain liberties and rights, which have obviously grown over time, and they're very much a constitutional republic, of course, today. The United States deliberately did it differently. It's the opposite. The government doesn't give rights to the people. The people give powers to the government, and only those powers that it says they want to give them. That's why they're enumerated. And so the people are sovereign in the United States. We the people, that's what that means, we the people. In order to form a more perfect union, we're the bosses. And there's no government until we say there is, and there's only the kind of government that we say that there will be, at least in theory. And so that's why there's all these separation of powers, checks and balances and so on, to sort of keep government in line with the wishes of the people. Now, just very quickly, Tova, on the question of what was different about this. This was the first time in the history of the world, in terms of the American Revolution, that a people declared their independence, not on the basis of some special attribute they had that made them special from other people, but on the basis of what we share with all humanity. The idea that all human beings are created equal, and that we have the potential, the capacity to govern ourselves. Not be governed by a king or a group of aristocrats, but to govern ourselves. And what that meant that we wouldn't just have the power, but we would take the responsibility to govern ourselves well and justly so that we would deserve the power that we were asserting. This was the great experiment in self-government. That's what they called it, the great experiment in self-government. They said the eyes of the world are upon us. Liberty hangs in the balance. Can we show the world and show ourselves that we are capable of ruling ourselves?
That's amazing. Wow, chills. That's so great. I'm so hyped for Constitution Day coming up. So also thinking about the Constitution being written, were there any sources or precedents that the founders took from in order to create the Constitution, or was it a completely novel invention?
Well, I know you know the answer to this, Tova, actually, right? Because we borrowed quite a lot from the British. They did a lot of things very well, the founders thought, because they had over the years established some very solid rights and liberties of the people. And so lots of things like that. I mean, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, we did it slightly differently. Ours was a broader notion that we included in our First Amendment, but still these ideas were very much British ideas. The idea of separation of powers, checks and balances. This was what Montesquieu observed was the case in the British government, though they did it by class, technically, you know, the House of Lords, the House of Commons, and the monarch. But in reality, it really wasn't by class because their parliament was supreme in reality, as David Hume pointed out. So we borrowed lots from them, but we also had our own ideas. And I think first among the founders in terms of really thinking through ideas in a new way, because he wanted what was James Madison. He looked at the history of republics and confederacies, and he studied this right before the Constitutional Convention. He sat in his study at Montpelier, Virginia, and he just buried himself in his books. And his question was, look, they've tried to make this thing called popular government work over and over and over again. All the Greek republics tried it, the Roman Republic tried it. And every time, even if there's what Hamilton called momentary rays of glory that break forth from the gloom, a little bit of success here and there, mostly popular government had failed. Over and over again, it had failed. The people couldn't govern themselves. They ended up being a faction and being unjust to others. And so Madison's whole challenge was, I want to make this work. We Americans, we are going to be, for the first time in the history of the world, we're going to find the way to make self-government actually work and establish itself on a solid footing so that the future of America will be the future of liberty.
That's so powerful a statement for all of the subsequent history. And I read once that our constitution is actually, our written constitution's actually the oldest and the shortest written constitution in the world. So how did we accomplish that? Like all of these amazing lofty ideals for humanity that we were able to fit in such a short document. How did we do this?
Wow, what a great question. I heard said once, and I don't know this is true, so I'll be careful about this, but I heard that one president once said, everybody should read the Constitution, it's really short. You should all read it. I've read most of it. I don't know if that's true or not, but I've heard that. So the reason the Constitution is pithy is because it's establishing principles. It's not trying to tell us in detail exactly how to live our lives. It's granting certain powers and only certain powers to the government. And all the others, as you find when you then study the Bill of Rights after the Constitution, right? The 10th Amendment says all those powers not granted are reserved to the states or to the people. That is, there's a whole plethora of powers that's reserved, that's not granted. And so the Constitution doesn't have to be so long because it's meant to be a limited government and to basically express the principles and the processes that we're to follow. And remember, laws are supposed to be general and universal. The best laws don't get too specific about things.
I just want to recap what you said, which I think is really important, Dr. Sheehan. In America, the government doesn't grant powers to the people, but the people grant powers to the government. I think that's a wonderful statement that you just said. And if we compare America and the way we think with, say, how China thinks, China is a government that grants powers to the people. And our same thing with, yeah, but I mean, if there are any powers at all, it's going to come from the government. It's not going to come from the people. It's the dictator is going to tell them what to do. Whatever powers they have or whatever rights they have, which are very few, is what you're saying, and I agree with you. It's going to come from the government down, whereas we, the people, grant it to the government. I think that for everyone listening, that's a wonderful juxtaposition of what happens in a lot of countries out there, whether it's Iran or North Korea. In different in every continent, there are still governments that are under dictatorships like that. I also think it's really interesting what you just said about our Constitution is on principle, not specific. I always try to say that word and sound really smart, but I can never get it out. Specificity. I did it. A little levity. We gotta have a few laughs. But I don't know if Dakare is getting a shot or where he is with this, but I do think it's interesting to turn this to sort of modern day now at the half-hour break and figure and discuss where we've gone wrong, where the government is becoming too powerful. I know that we have our TCC. It's a wonderful, as you said, Dr. Sheehan, a breakdown of Article 1, Section 8, the specific powers that are actually granted to the people. No, the government. These are the specific powers that are granted to the government. And we heard Ted Cruz rattle this off on stage once, and we were like, what is that? But here are the specific powers that the government can have, that the people grant the government. Taxes, credit, TCC, taxes, credit, commerce. NCC, naturalization, coinage, counterfeiting. PCC, post office, copyright, court. Pawn, piracy, army, war, navy. MAMA, which is militia, money for militia, Washington, D.C. I'm not sure how that fits in with A, but whatever. And run. So it's TCC, NCC, PCC, pawn, MAMA, run. Rules and necessary and proper. So that's a sketch. It's a kind of a cool way to remember it. If anyone wants a copy of this, they can email us and we can send it to them, send a copy of this to our audience. But where have we gone wrong? I know that that, you know, we have the factions that are slowing Democrat Republican parties, that are slowing the process down in Congress, which were already supposed to be slow to begin with, to think things through, to not make passionate mob type of decisions.
Another great question. I wish I had the answer to it. That's the $60,000 question for America today, isn't it? What's happened to us and what do we do about it? Because right now, what seems to be going on is that at least a significant portion of the American people are polarized. And it's on the basis, I think, more than anything, it's not on the basis really so much of religion or, I mean, there are these divisions on religion, gender, and so forth, race, and so on. And all of those are important and that things we need to talk about. But the biggest divide right now is on the basis of ideas, of what we might call ideology. And to some extent, there's a desire for two different Americas. We are experiencing great polarization and fragmentation. There's almost a desire for what we might call two different constitutions. Constitution with a small c, the way you've taken it in your title. What constitutes America? What makes us up? What is the character, the way of life, the way of thinking that guides us? And there's two very, very different views on that today. And that's why we're clashing. It's what might be called, it's what happens, there's no country immune from this. And this is what destroys countries ultimately. It's when they don't have something fundamental in common anymore. And what America has always in the past had in common is that apple of gold, Janine. That's the purpose of the Union and the Constitution. And the apple of gold is the Declaration of Independence. But the Declaration of Independence represents an idea, a purpose. And that purpose is that all human beings are created equal. But what does that mean? It means that we treat each other with the kind of dignity and respect that human beings deserve. Human beings who are capable of governing themselves. Now we have to live up to that in order to be treated that way. I mean, if we break laws and commit murder and things like that, we obviously, people have to go to prison. But the idea is that we are a nation of equals, that we each have the right and the responsibility to govern ourselves. Where are we with that today? That idea of equality. Well, there are some Americans who are trying to hold on to that America that has to do with what we've always stood for. The idea that we're capable of governing ourselves and that we have rights and liberties of which government should not interfere. And then there's another group of Americans who think that the times have changed so much that what we need is what's called the administrative state. We need government to take care of us. That the world is too complex and too big and too industrialized, and there's too many corporate powers and so on for people to govern themselves anymore. And so what we need are experts at the helm who will do the right thing for the rest of us. Now, that's what Woodrow Wilson actually argued. He was a professor of political science, and that was his argument. He rejected the founding views, and he said we need to go in a different direction because the world is too complex and government has to do for us much, much more. And we need experts in there doing it. And that's the way a lot of folks think today. And they want more from government, and they want us to be the receivers, the recipients. And then there's another group of Americans who say, no way am I gonna let government do that to be my boss. This whole experiment was about showing the world and showing ourselves that we're capable of using our liberty wisely and well and governing ourselves and raising our families ourselves. And I think that's what a big amount of the dispute is about. The other part that it's about is two different visions of how we should live our lives. How we should live our lives, what it means to be human. Are there certain things that are required of us, certain things that lines we can't cross because that's not appropriate as human beings to live that way. And then other people think that human nature, there isn't any such thing and it's plastic and it can become anything that anybody wants it to be. And anything anybody wants it to be, as long as they want it, is okay. Those are two very different views of what it means to be human that people in America are fighting over.
So what you're saying, Dr. Sheehan, which I think is really fascinating, is there's a faction out there, we go back to what you said earlier, there's a faction that believes that the government needs to tell us what our powers are and what should be done. When there's another faction, which is the original, what the country is based on, which says, no, the people will grant the government. So what you said earlier is coming back full circle here, and that's what's creating the two factions. One believes the government should grant us our powers. The other believes, no, the people should grant the government their powers. And that's really simply said, and really, really something good, I think, to come out of this Zoom is that exactly is what is happening right now. And as soon as Dakare is finished and Cathy's finished, I hope I have a moment to ask you how the Constitution can save us from the faction that wants the government only to grant powers to the people as opposed to the people granting powers to the government. What's innate within the Constitution that's going to prevent this crisis from happening? So we'll come back to that at the very end, but Dakare, go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, Doctor, thank you so much for being here. My question is, what can we do as American citizens to aid the government in making sure that these actions are carried out?
Which actions are you talking about, Dakare? Which actions?
This article in particular.
Oh, so to make sure that government is limited.
Yes.
What can we do to aid government? Okay. Let me see if I can rephrase your question a little bit, because I'm not sure that it's so much that we need to aid the government as that we need to demand that the government follow the rules of the Constitution. That's our job as citizens, actually. And one of the things to make that happen more, I think, is that we should demand of our congressmen and women that they start legislating again and stop abdicating the powers that they have to the Supreme Court and to the executive and to the bureaucracy. They've let it go because when there's a controversial issue, they don't want to get in too much trouble, so they'll pass an overly generalized law, right, Tova, called clean water or clean air. I mean, who's going to be opposed to clean water or clean air? And so they don't want the controversy, and then they let the bureaucracy fill that in. And the more that they do that, the more the bureaucracy, unelected officials, are running our lives and telling us what to do. And this has become huge in some of the Western states, by the way, where the national government has taken over the police powers of the states. And so the bureaucracy in America started out to be a few people in George Washington's cabinet: Edmund Randolph, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, Henry Knox. There you have it, a part-time clerk named Philip Freneau. How many people are in the bureaucracy of the United States today, the administration? Millions. And they're the ones running much of our lives. And the Congress is allowing that because they're passing omnibus bills and shucking out their responsibility to the other branches. And I think we need to hold their feet to the fire. I think this is what I think it's you, especially Dakare and Tova, your generation, who needs to say to Congress, or if they won't do it, you need to run for Congress and say, you have a job to do. Have the courage to do it.
Cathy, go ahead.
Well, and thank you, Dr. Sheehan. So much of the audience today is actually asking the question that we've been discussing, which is what can we do to fix it? Mike Capik says, how can we, the people, return Congress to its lost stature as the strongest leader of the three branches? And Lewis White is asking about repealing the 17th Amendment and talking about how the 17th Amendment weakened the states. And I thought maybe if you could just talk briefly about, I found it very interesting that when our Constitutional Convention met and they were writing Article 1, that it was not a given that they were going to even have a bicameral legislature. And as we discussed earlier today, you had reminded me that it was called the Great Compromise. And I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about that, because the way our founders set it up, it seems so important to the checks and balances. And it brings in a little bit of what Lewis White is talking about with the 17th Amendment.
Yeah. Oh, great. Lots of great questions there. Let me just try to say just a little bit so we can make sure there's time for other questions. But so, I mean, there were, Franklin actually talked about maybe having a unicameral legislature, just one house. Georgia had a unicameral legislature. And some people thought that was a better idea because it's less conflict. And so there's more union. But Madison, James Wilson, Hamilton, and most of the others, most everybody thought we should have two houses, and that we want to build in a certain amount of force, counterforce, a kind of rivalry, because rivalry means that it takes time to get a decision made. And guess what happens when you take time to get a decision made? Hopefully, at least, people will talk. And when they talk, they have to think, because they have to listen too. And so it's called deliberation. And so hopefully we would come up with more reasonable measures of government, that we would refine and enlarge the public views, refine and enlarge public opinion. So it's a better fit sovereign to rule. So that's one idea. So that's why you have a Senate and a House of Representatives who each have equal power. It takes each one of them has to sign on to the same bill for it to become a law. Remember, there's also a third thing. We involve the president in the legislative process a little bit because it's a way to check the legislature by the veto power, but we don't leave it there because we want Congress to have the final word so that Congress can override the presidential veto. All of this is, of course, in the Constitution. When we decided to go to direct election of senators, it took away the check of the states, the state legislatures on the senators. And that was a powerful check that we had, and why some people think that it's not so much direct democracy versus, some kind of aristocracy, as much as it is the power of the states and the state legislatures to check their US senators. So that's why some folks think that was a mistake to have gone in that direction. It hurt federalism in the end. And it made the national government more centralized and more powerful and the states weaker. And so that's an important consideration, because federalism isn't just a compromise. Federalism is a principle of our government. If you're going to have a country this large, but we still want the people to govern themselves, then it has to be broken up into parts where there's real authority happening at those levels called the state and local levels. That's why local school boards are so incredibly important. We have to let them do that job. That's part of the way we as citizens engage in the tools of self-government.
I want to go back to Cathy, but that's about, how important it is for the government is local. I mean, all politics is local, that's really an important aspect of our country. And that our Constitution is laid out in that way, whether it's on national constitution or state constitutions, but that, we've become so homogenized in our country that people in, let's say, deep Southwest Texas, that community may need or want something very different than the most northeastern corner of Maine or way over in Seattle. We're different people. And real conflict starts to happen when we want to nationalize everybody to think the same and do the same thing, and people don't want to do the same thing. We've immigrated here from all over the world. We think differently, and the Constitution gives us the opportunity to have local representatives that give us that can represent the uniqueness and the diversity of the people. Okay, go ahead, Cathy.
Well, thank you that was a great encapsulation of a very broad question. So thank you from earlier. Shelley Ames writes, does the president have too much power? Do you feel like that, and not just now, but just over the past maybe 50 or 100 years, has the president taken on more power than the founders intended? Has the Congress let them do that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that really goes back to, I think, what I was just talking about. There have been books written called The Imperial Presidency, and it ebbs and flows, but there is a certain sense in which the complexity of the times, especially with technology and the change in warfare, and the president having the power of commander-in-chief of the armed forces in the Constitution, that changed the nature of that game a little bit. It had to. We don't have any way around that. Having said that, the growth in the bureaucracy, which is under the executive, did not have to happen the way it's happened. Congress has had a large hand in that, and has encouraged it by their abdication of responsibility. There's a fellow named John Marini who's written a lot on this issue of the administrative state. And there's some short articles that you might be interested in on a website called Law and Liberty, which is excellent. It's an excellent resource for taking important questions and having people write short, readable articles that you could assign to your students, at least high school students, maybe junior high too. That I encourage you to take a look at John Marini's work, because the more that Tocqueville talked about this, it creates a kind of paternalism where we're like children just being taken care of, and we think that this is all good for us, and we just want, the more that we're taken care of, the lazier we become, and we just want somebody, ultimately we want somebody to live our lives for us. Let them do that too. That is not what the country was founded on. We were a pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of country. I spent last year in Colorado, and they still have that attitude there. It's very different there than it is on the Eastern Seaboard. And I appreciated it. And it crossed party lines. It was an attitude of the rugged American that, yeah, we can do that. It was a can-do attitude, a kind of a little bit of an independence of spirit. And I think we're in need of, in America, of rediscovering that.
It's interesting because that's as soon as people want to be taken care of by the government and losing that can-do spirit, what starts to happen, what's going to inevitably happen, which happened in Rome, in Greece and all these other places, is we will end up with a dictator. We will end up with a dictator or a king. It's inevitable, like a Napoleon. If they're gonna come in, and because the people want to be taken care of, I don't think that's ultimately what they think they want, but it's what ultimately always happens if we start delegating all of our power back to the government, wanting the government to take care of us. It's a cyclical aspect. And okay, so can we close with talking about necessary and proper, because we only have 5 minutes left, and I know there are people out there that want to talk about the necessary and proper clause in the first Article 1, and how that was intended and how it's abused today.
Well, that of course has been a controversy almost since day one of the establishment of the Constitution, because remember, Hamilton and Madison worked side by side in writing the Federalist Papers, right? They spoke in one voice. They with Jay signed all the papers, Publius. And then that's in 1787, 1788, the material that you just went through with folks on Constituting America, the Federalist Papers. by 1790, 91, 92, there was a split between Madison and Jefferson on one side, Hamilton on the other side. And it was over, part of what it was over was the National Bank and the Necessary and Proper Clause. And Jefferson wanted to define it as only what is really necessary, the way we use the word necessary in kind of ordinary language. Is it necessary for the government to do that? Hamilton had he had a strict interpretation. Hamilton had a much looser interpretation that had to do with that the means are appropriate if the ends are established. And Jefferson would agree with that to some extent, but he and Madison thought that Hamilton was taking advantage of it. And so there was a huge disagreement about just what was necessary and proper. And we've been fighting about that ever since. And you know, one of the things where you really find this is on the Interstate Commerce Clause. Remember, that's in the Article 1 too. Congress has the right to regulate interstate commerce. What is interstate commerce? Well, now there's a lot of crossing of state lines, right? But it's not just by horse and buggy or horses. It's by trains and cars and trucks and airplanes and so on. And the Supreme Court has decided to interpret interstate commerce as almost everything is interstate commerce. So Congress gets to regulate pretty much everything. And whatever the difference is between sensible interpretations, fair interpretations of necessary and proper, and the scope of the national government, that interpretation of the Interstate Commerce Clause is absolutely contrary to the spirit of limited government. So I would just start there, that there's got to be some common sense in interpreting the text of the Constitution, that it establishes certain ends and certain principles, and that we have to understand what those ends and principles are to understand what would be necessary to accomplish them. I'm not sure that a lot of the law school professors or potential or current or past Supreme Court justices, at least some of them, are too terribly concerned about staying within the limits of the enumerated powers. Because remember, there's this idea in America that government is here to help us, and it needs to solve our problems and make our lives equal and different and good according to their conception of what that would be. And so the Constitution gets in the way of some of the people's, the powerful people's agendas, the elite's agendas. There's an elite in America today, I think, that has very good intentions, but the results will be the demise of self-government. And that's what worries me.
Wow, I agree. And you know, they teach two different types of law now in closing. One's nature's law, which is exactly what we're talking about. It's nature's law, you know, self-government, you know, sticking with the Constitution. And then there's a new form of law that they teach in law schools now, which is essentially, you know, broader and everything that you're talking about. And they don't want to deal with nature's law. Well, okay, you have just been fantastic. Do we? It's 2 o'clock, so I think we have to stop. I think we could go on forever. We go ever and ever and ever and ever. And Dr. Sheehan, you were just amazing. Do you have a final comment? Because I just think you were brilliant, and thank you so much.
Well, hardly that, Janine, but thank you. I would like to just respond very quickly to the question you asked earlier. How can the Constitution save us? It can't. We have to save the Constitution. It's the other way around. The Constitution cannot save us. We have to save the Constitution as our guide for living a life in freedom and responsibility.
And we do that how? By these type of forums, by educating why the Constitution is important, by understanding the principles of our country.
Yeah, there's no magic bullet. It takes a lot of work. It's called the work of self-government. And it's an ongoing pay it forward kind of work. That the more we do it, the more that's asked of us, the more we ask of the next generation. And there's a debt that we owe to the founders for making this possible, but they never said they'd do it for us. It's an ongoing experiment in self-government, and we won't last forever. America will not last forever. No regime ever has. It's the nature of the world, but it could last a lot longer if we do our jobs as citizens.
Well said. Tova, do I see if you want to say something in closing?
This is so powerful, and I hope that especially young people watching really take this to heart. Because unfortunately, even though we live in an age where there's more information about the world out there than ever before at our fingertips, fortunately, so many people don't take it upon themselves to educate themselves and to learn, or they are misinformed. And I think there's a very dangerous strain that I've seen among young people of people saying, just giving up on the country, saying, oh my gosh, you know, for so long there have been problems in America and they're going to continue, and, you know, this and this and that, and we don't really have a say in our government and anything. And so people just are genuinely giving up and abdicating their responsibilities as citizens and saying, well, I feel like I can't do anything. I feel like there are problems that have been going on for a while, so let's just give up. But that is the absolute wrong attitude to have. That's not going to solve any problems. As you said so beautifully, the Constitution's not going to save us if we're not actively protecting it. We won't be protected as citizens. So we have to take the opposite approach. We need to be proactive. If you see problems in the country, giving up is just going to make them worse. Actually, go out there and solve them and use the Constitution. Continuously hold our government and your elected officials to the Constitution. Make sure they're upholding your rights. And if they're not, please don't give up. That's the absolute worst attitude to have. No, that's never what America's been about. So just, I would say, always be upstanding, always educate people around you, and keep fighting to uphold ourselves to the country that our founders laid out.
Doesn't she give you hope for the future of our country? Everyone, Tova, what do we teach in all of our seminars? In all of our lectures, what do we teach? How is it you can hold your government accountable? You can do a what?
Can do a lot of things, a petition.
Yes.
As Janine always says, our elected officials work for us, so you are totally in your rights to go to their office, maybe not during Corona, but, you know, go into their office or send an email, write a letter, write a petition. You are allowed to talk to them, and they are supposed to talk to you. And like, make sure they know what problems you have, and make sure you hold them accountable to solve them. That's their job.
And we use the tools in the First Amendment, the tools in the toolbox to do that. I think people don't really understand, because I think what Tova's talking about is the apathy that her generation feels because they don't understand how to do it, you know, the clarity. And so we teach the First Amendment, the tools in the toolbox. It starts with writing that petition. So we actually teach students and everyone who listens to our speeches, you know, they're Socratic. You know, we actually go back and forth, but it's with the Constitution. I mean, we start with a petition, and how we then use speech, and then we use the press, and then we use the assembly, all of that to how do you do it? Okay, we got to close. Cathy?
Well, and thank you, Dr. Sheehan. And it just reminds me of one of our favorite quotes at Constituting America, John Adams: liberty cannot be preserved without a general knowledge among the people. So thank you for helping us with our knowledge today. And we want to thank our sponsors, Robin and Everett Helmuth of Passport Auto, for making today possible.
Dr. Sheehan, thank you once again. Truly, truly thought-provoking and inspirational. It's just given us so much that we've learned so much, and also we've learned how we must really be people of action. So thank you.